At 4ZZZ, we acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we broadcast. We pay our respects to the elders past, present and emerging of the Turrbal and Jagera people. We acknowledge that their sovereignty over this land was never ceded.
And we stand in solidarity with them.
Tranzmission on 4ZZZ, amplifying the trans and gender diverse community of Meanjin, Brisbane and beyond.
My name is Ray, I use they, them pronouns, and you're listening to Tranzmission on 4ZZZ. I'm very excited for today's show. I'm going to be chatting with playing a recording of a interview I did with Eli Sutherland, who is the festival director of Tranz Book Festival, and also chatting with Toby Fitch about their new book, or an autobiography, which is based on Virginia Woolf's Orlando. First of all, though, we will chat about some recent news. In international news, Republicans in the House of Representatives have introduced HR 7661, an anti-trans bill that would create a nationwide ban on LGBTQ+ books in public schools. The bill's vague language is key to where and how it would be applied, and its creation follows several local level and state level policies and laws across the countries banning quote-unquote gender ideology and or trans books for minors in public schools and public libraries. A bill like this could potentially be used to outright ban all books by or about LGBTQ+ people under the guise of them being quote-unquote sexually oriented. However, in more positive interstate news, the New South Wales government has introduced proposed changes to the state's Library Act aimed at protecting public libraries from book bans and censorships. The proposed new legislation aims to protect the right of public libraries to collect material some may find offensive and for the public to read what they choose. At the State Library of New South Wales event, New South Wales Arts Minister John Graham introduced the amendments to the State's Library Act, saying, "We're making freedom to read part of the legislation." There have been at least 309 attempts to exclude 184 titles from public library shelves around Australia since 2023, according to reports to the Australian Library and Information Association. Most of the complaints related to material about LGBTQIA+ communities. And also in local news, Brisbane drag performers Johnny Valkyrie, aka Queenie, and Dwayne Hill, aka Diamond, have won an appeal against Family First National Director Lyle Shelton after an earlier vilification decision was overturned, finding that, quote, drag is a vital and central aspect of queer culture. The Queensland Appeal Tribunal ruled that the earlier 2023 complaint dismissal was affected by significant legal and factual errors. The Appeal Tribunal has roundly rejected the idea that homophobia and transphobia live in the past, said Equality Australia Legal Director Heather Corkill. This recognition is important when we know the reality that LGBTQ+ people continue to experience coordinated campaigns online that cause terrible harm. The tribunal recognised that, quote, drag is a vital and central aspect of queer culture and affirmed that it is a, quote, predominantly queer art form. So that's some positive news for your morning. And more exciting things for your morning. I'm thrilled to once again be showcasing local trans and gender diverse poets in the new monthly segment Trans Verse. So this is a poem from River Snowdrop.
Trans Verse, featuring the poetry of trans and gender diverse people from Meanjin and beyond. Our voices are vivid, valid and vital, and we're not going away.
Hi, my name is River Snowdrop. My pronouns are they, them. I'm from Manchester, UK, and you can find me on Instagram at River Snowdrop. This is my poem, 1 month on tea. My boyhood has really kicked in. Crabapple blooms on testosterone skin. I find my dermis punctured, bruised with man's becoming. Else, cryptid, slicked blisters, hair unbolted. Each run through is discovery. I am shredding, hole upon hill, the slippage of a grand stepping forward, recovering from girlhood, rejecting. My eyes contain storm fields, white cranes. I am as much telephone pole as I am heron, as tall oil rig, as softly current. Middle smudges in his hands. We mustn't waste it.
My name is Ray. I use they, them pronouns, and you're listening to Tranzmission on 4ZZZ. And I'm excited to continue showcasing for you poets who are local and from around so-called Australia and the world here on 4ZZZ whenever I'm on the show, because poetry is fantastic and I love how trans poets just, look, they do poetry really, really well, and I'm really excited to be showcasing more incredible poets. First of all, though, in the show, I want to play the first part of my interview with Eli Sutherland, who uses they, them pronouns, who's the festival director of Tranz Book Festival. And Tranz Book Festival is the only writers' festival in the Southern Hemisphere that's focused on uplifting and celebrating trans and gender diverse literary excellence in all narrative forms. And the festival will be held from the 17th to the 19th of April in Naarm at the Wheeler Centre. So this is the first part of my chat with Eli.
My name's Eli Sutherland. I use they, them pronouns, and I am here on Wurundjeri country. I'm up in beautiful Preston and kind of right near the Preston markets, which is the best spot. Trees and magpie warbles and a mosque right outside. It's very lovely. And I'm the festival director of Tranz Book Festival. I'm also a writer. I'm on a couple of literary boards. I'm doing my master's in writing and literature. What else am I?
I was like, oh my goodness. So how's the sleep schedule going?
Look, it's a bit busy. I'm also in one of my best friend's weddings in less than 2 weeks. There's just a lot going on. But no, it's going really well.
I mean, look, relatable content. As we were talking about before we hit record, I know the feeling. I have 20 million jobs and 20 million things going on at any given point. And yeah, I'm really excited to talk to you about one of those things that you've got going on, which is Tranz Book Festival happening in April in Naarm. Yeah, do you want to tell our listeners a bit more about it? Because I think being here in Meganjin, a lot of people might not have heard of Tranz Book Festival yet.
Well, and I think a lot of people in Naarm wouldn't have heard of it yet either, because it's a very new phenomenon. So Tranz Book Festival, we're in the second year now. Trans writer Sam Elkin had this beautiful brainchild last year in 2025, had this idea to run a Trans Book Festival, and it was a one-day festival plus a pre-festival, like a zine making workshop, and it was in Feb of 2025 at the Wheeler Centre, and it was the most incredible day. I chaired the young adult panel session then, and honestly, it was the day that I finally felt like a writer, and I finally felt like accepted in the literary world, and like I wasn't an imposter anymore. Yeah, I listened back to a voice note that I sent a friend the following day about it, like a few weeks ago, and I was like, oh my gosh, I literally said all of that, and that like it feels like a future memory, like this day feels really important, and there's going to be a ripple effect of this, and I don't know what it is yet, but it feels important. And then like fast forward 6-9 months, and Sam asked me to take it over and run it again, and here we are. So we're doing 3 days this time, the 17th to the 19th of April. And the first day, the 17th, is a full day of workshops. So that's going to be at Studio Take Care in Brunswick. And then the 18th and 19th are going to be back at the Wheeler Centre, and just lots of panels and conversations and chatting with people and getting books signed and all the things.
And it's, I think, as you said, like with imposter syndrome, like I definitely have felt that quite a lot in more like cis het writer scenes, and there is that going to be that ripple-on effect, I think, with Trans Book Festival, because it means that trans people can see themselves and like go to panels and be inspired, and hopefully inspire even more trans writers and trans creatives.
And that's the goal, like that the people that are coming together in the room for most of the workshops, it's a trans and gender diverse space only, but for the one of the workshops and all of the actual weekend itself, that is for TGD people and our allies, so everyone's welcome. And it's, I guess, a way to showcase the literary excellence of trans folks. The whole program is all trans artists. So yeah, like it's engaging allies in the work that we're producing, but it's also this space where, the majority of us are in predominantly cis spaces, and having a place where we are not the minority in that way. Like obviously there are intersectional identities in place in this, and there's like a lot of, like other considerations, but if we're just looking at gender diversity, it felt like incredibly special, and I think so motivating and creativity inducing.
Because I think often when I'm at festivals, it's like me and one other trans person programs, and that's it's great that there are trans people programs.
Absolutely.
But to have a festival that is entirely, of trans artists and trans writers is just, to be honest, it's something that, when I first heard about it last year, and then when you approached me this year about it, I was just shocked and thrilled, because it's kind of a dream, and it's kind of I wouldn't say utopia, that's like a contentious kind of vibe, but it's such an incredible vision, and it's one that I think is gonna really it's already creating an incredible legacy for trans writers, within so-called Australia. So it's incredible.
Well, and I think I definitely am not trying to kind of trash talk the mainstream literary festivals.
100%.
And I know that you're not taking that stance either, and they, a few of them, we've had a bit of drama in the literary festival world in the last few months, but I think for the most part it is really great to see that there is more progressive and diverse programming happening in those spaces, and some of the times it's on an identity basis. Like we're kind of finding that you're talking about transness rather than talking about your creativity and your art, and so I think the really special thing about Trans Book Fest is that we are there to talk about the art and the creativity, and of course identity comes into play in that, and it has this quality of being present, but it doesn't have to be the only thing that's being talked about in the room. So I think you can just kind of push a bit further and move past some of these things. And I think that's also how we were really trying to intentionally build this year's program around that fact that on an intersectional lens, we've got, say for instance, First Nations trans artists coming, and we have one panel that is specifically a First Nations focused and led panel that was curated by Leigh Maloney, incredible YA writer. But then there are First Nations artists all throughout the program. You're not on a panel purely because of your identity or identities. You're on panels because you have really cool and interesting stories to tell.
Yeah, exactly. You're on the panels because you love writing, and you've got, as you said, you've got stories to tell that aren't, obviously at the end of the day, like everything kind of intersects with our identities, but at the same time, it doesn't necessarily have to be absolutely all about that. And yeah, I think that's absolutely incredible. And like, I think the first time that I saw a trans person perform at a festival was like Ivan Coyote, Queensland Poetry Festival. Like, it would have been a while ago now. And I was like, oh yeah, I can do that. And so I think that there's that idea of like, it's classic thing of like, you can't be what you can't see. And like, there's going to be a lot of, and I think that, there have already been like a lot of opportunities for trans people. But I think like something like Trans Book Festival is incredible because it'll, showcase those trans stories and encourage more people to write their own trans stories. I was like, speaking of trans stories, is there any panels or events or anything at the festival that you would like to highlight and kind of talk about?
Oh, even just as you were saying that, I was thinking about like, wanting people to have that inspiration to pick up the pen and write the stories. But I think as well, we're not focusing purely on, like that capital L literature.
Yes.
There certainly are some capital L literature panels and events and things happening. But I think, we've got some other really cool things. Like we've got one on interactive literature, which is a space that I'm not super well versed in, but Alexander Swords is going to be running, this workshop that is using, I think it's a
was it Twine?
Like a program called Twine.
Yeah.
And I just think it'd be really cool for people to come and explore like what different forms of literature there are and how like differently you need to approach that from a writing and a structure and whatever perspective. And then we've got another workshop by a writer and like songwriter, Malika, who is doing this workshop on body percussion and call and response using Swahili, East African principles of like creating music in community. And that in and of itself is a form of writing and communication. And so they'll be running a workshop and also doing a live performance on the Sunday. And so I think that there's some really cool capital L literature and some like alternative forms of storytelling things that I'm really excited for.
Because I do think that a lot of, when we talk about like queer writing and like queer stories and like especially trans stories, like they're not linear. And I think that things like, Twine and Bitsy and songwriting and so many different forms of like storytelling lend themselves more to like trans stories rather than necessarily like capital L literature vibes, which is good vibes, but like also there's alternatives out there. And like honestly, as someone who's made a Twine, it's way less daunting than writing a book. So like listeners should totally get on that.
That's so cool. I have no idea about Twine, but it sounds really cool.
It's like a back in the day hypertext storytelling creation. I'm not sure if that's a thing that
not a term that I also know,
Look, hey, you don't need to know much coding, and you can just have a red hot go, which is my favorite way of writing things.
Love that. Well, and just like diving in, I think that's like the best way to learn is just trying.
Yeah, exactly. And I think like workshops like the ones that you mentioned will give people, those tools to have a red hot go. And like, even if it's not something that they, you don't need to necessarily have an end product. You can just have some fun as well, which is really important.
How many genders are there?
I don't know. I just got here.
And the track was my interview with Eli Sutherland for the Tranz Book Festival, which I'm really excited about. It's the only writers' festival in the Southern Hemisphere focused on uplifting and celebrating trans and gender diverse literary excellence in all narrative forms. And it'll be held in Naarm from the 17th to the 19th of April. So this is the second part of my chat with Eli Sutherland.
I'm kind of working on a few different manuscripts at the moment, and there's one in particular that I'm feeling a little bit stuck on. And the other day I was at a first birthday party, and I think I've been so separated from like creating for creation's sake and so focused on outcomes that I just kind of like lost the wonder of the process a little bit. But at this first birthday party, I made 2 wands. Listeners, I'm showing these wands to Ray.
Oh, I was like, one is like a snowflake and one is a butterfly, and they've got like little glittery gems and like bows. That's some real gay wands. I love them.
Thank you. Well, they're for my 2 nibblings, who one is obsessed with Frozen and one is a little nature boy. And so I made these little wands with one of my partners, and it was such a beautiful like exercise in just focusing on the thing in front of me and having a go. I'm not really visually creative, very like word creative, and it gave me such a bout of inspiration for the words. It was so interesting. So I feel like having those tangential creative experiences that are just fun and don't need to be about an outcome and don't need to be perfect can be so helpful in your main creative focus.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that I like about even things like ekphrasis, which obviously, like, you know, if you're looking at a piece of art and then writing about it, that does still have an outcome, but there is that kind of intersection of an interplay between something that is not writing. And I know exactly what you mean. Like, often if I go out and just like hang out with, you know, a bird that I see or something, or like go, you know, I don't know, do some pottery or something, which I've done before, like the next day my mind is kind of singing with all these new words and thoughts.
It's such a beautiful phenomenon. I love it. Is ekphrastic art like usually off the basis of visual art, or can it be any other art that you're kind of...
Well, see, this is I feel like this is there's like definitely tension in between what people think. I personally think it can be anything. I think ekphrasis can be like about, you know, a visual art or like video games. I write a lot of video game poetry. I think that's ekphrasis. And I think that there's like, I feel like ekphrasis is just like a fancy word for fandom or fan fiction. So
right, that's what I was about to say. Like, is it just fanfic then? Which incredible.
To be honest, yeah, I'm sure that like people are going to listen to this and be like, absolutely not. Ekphrasis is a fancy and important art, but you know, I don't think it is a bad thing to say that, yeah, ekphrasis can be about whatever you want it to be. And
when I particularly love the idea of like deconstructing what we mean by capital L literature, capital A art, and like giving certain art forms more cachet and relevance and like cultural credit over others. And I think like fanfic is one of those, and just genrefic in general is one of those. I'm such a genrefic person. I write fantasy, I read a lot of fantasy and sci-fi. I'll read a lit fic, but I'm gonna want the plotty genrefic more than anything, and I'm gonna enjoy it more because, yeah, like personally, I just find them really engaging and plotty and like interesting and fun, and they light up this part of my brain that is I don't know, it's just how I process information and how I learn and grow as a human being is through those kinds of stories rather than through like the meandering character-based, you know.
And I feel like they also like lend themselves a lot more to trans stories, like, and queer stories. of I guess the way that you can kind of I don't know, like let loose a little bit more with fantasy and spec fic maybe, and not necessarily like there's that kind of, it can be like quite plot based but also exploratory. I don't know.
100%. Well, sorry to interrupt you. I was just going to say, like, because as a reader, you have already suspended your disbelief around a lot of the elements of the world and the construction of reality. And so I think you are poised to enter into these worlds being like, oh yeah, polyamory is so normal and it's fine, or like this kind of queer relationship or this kind of identity is like, that's normal, and it has this power to expand realities. And I think that's so incredible.
Like, honestly, I wish that like a lot of people would take the template of, the fantasy novels that they read and like, and I'm talking about, cis people who hate trans people, but take that template and then like sort of, look at our world and be like, oh yeah, you know what? Things are more expansive than I originally thought. So yeah, if people are interested in heading to Trans Book Festival this year, how can they get tickets? How can they participate?
Incredible. Well, we have a website now. We were historically just putting everyone to our Instagram, classic, like just fledgling community org. But we've been working really hard on this website. It's transbookfestival.org. And the program is now up there, so you can have a look at all of the workshops on the Friday and then all the panels and conversations on the Saturday and Sunday. There's also an evening storytelling event on the Saturday night at the Moat, which is just underneath the Wheeler Centre. Beautiful venue. Everything is wheelchair accessible, and we've got lots of accessibility information on the website for each of the 3 venues. And then, there's different links, like we are selling weekend passes to the Saturday and Sunday, and then individual workshop and evening storytelling event tickets. So you can pick your price as well. We've got tiered ticketing rates, of course, and that's it. I think we're also on Instagram as Trans Book Festival, so it's pretty easy to find us.
Yeah, definitely head to the website, and you'll notice there that there's some people that we've mentioned on the show before, including Zoe Tarakis, who I interviewed last year, and there's a lot of incredible trans names in the festival program.
Well, Zoe is going to be on the opening in conversation between them and Dylan Hardcastle. So obviously Zoe came out with Eros recently, and Dylan's A Language of Limbs, such beautiful books. So they're going to be having a yarn on the Saturday morning. You are in 2 panels on the Sunday morning. So we've got Trans Poetics, which is just going to be incredible. So who's chairing that? I think it's Jazz Money is chairing that.
I was like, it sure ain't me.
Imagine if I just threw you in the deep end.
You're like, oh yeah, I'll have a go.
Give it a crack. It's about the process, not the end result. Then we've got obviously Ray, yourself, Kaya Ortiz, and Ellen Van Neerven and Hasib Harani on the Trans Poetics panel. And then you're also on our literary industry panel, which we're calling Selling Out, in brackets, complimentary, which I just think is very funny. And so Michael Earp is chairing that. Michael has recently taken over the Little Book Room, which is, I believe, the oldest children's specialist bookstore in the entire world. Very cool. But Michael has also worked as a writer and an editor and in publishing. Is just like, an incredible literary industry human. We're also going to have Savannah Hollis, who is an editor at Hardy Grant, on that panel. Leah Leasy, who works with Margabala Books, and Monty Weir, who is one of the, I think, board members, founders of Meridian Australis, which is a relatively new, speculative fiction magazine / they're doing some anthologies that they're publishing. They're running writers groups and other things. It's a really cool collective. And then yourself, obviously, through uplift poetry, is that what it's called, and MB Life, and
my 20 million
radio
jobs.
things,
Yeah.
yeah, just so many things. And your poetry book, Exactly As I Am. So there's just like so many cool people on all the things.
It's going to be so incredible. And just like, I was thinking of, like, as you were saying some of these names, and I was like, I'm just going to have a suitcase full of books to be signed. Like,
Truly.
I might need to increase my luggage allowance. Like, this is going to be a problem. And then I'll be bringing
one
books
bag coming
back.
over, two bags going back.
Oh my God. Honestly though, that is me a lot of the time at festivals. It's a bit of a problem. Maybe I could just get like a coat and, like, I don't know, like have lots of pockets inside the coat or something, and like put all the books in there. Be like
and then you'll be one of those flash your books.
Yeah, flash my books. Yeah. Like, people I hear love that.
Yeah. I've got a funny story about that in a subway in Paris, but no one needs to relive that.
Like, that's a future poem for you to write, maybe. I don't know.
Truly. That's actually
trauma.
A very good idea. Yeah. Processing my trauma. But we will have like artists signing books afterwards. We have, little breaks in between the panels and stuff. So Hares and Hyenas are going to be selling books on the weekend. They're the queer specialist in Naarm. And the Little Book Room, Michael Earp's bookstore, is going to be the bookseller at the workshop day. So there'll be books for sale on the Friday as well. And yeah, artists to sign them. It's very cool.
Amazing. Yeah, if anyone listening wants to head to Naarm for Trans Book Festival, it's the 17th to the 19th of April. Head to the website transbookfestival.org and yeah, have a look around, grab your tickets. Thank you so much for chatting with me today.
Thank you for having me. It's been such a delight. I'm so excited to have you in person as well.
I was like, I'm pretty giddy about it, to be quite honest. I'm gonna be a menace. I'm gonna see absolutely every single panel and talk to absolutely everyone. It's gonna be great.
Love it. That was me last year, and it was the best.
Thank you.
So good. Thank you.
My name is Ray. I use they, them pronouns, and you're listening to Tranzmission on 4ZZZ. I'm thrilled to now air an interview that I had a couple of weeks ago now with Toby Fitch, who is in Gadigaland, and we spoke about their new book called Or, an Autobiography, which explores fluidities of self, body and imagination. Its central long poem in the text, called The Or Tree, is a speculative version of the fictitious poem The Oak Tree by Virginia Woolf's Orlando. And what I really love about this poetry book is that it's also complemented by an understory, which is this kind of poetic essay that intertwines with the poem and sort of plays with autobiographical the autobiographical nature of the text and citations. So the book was released on the 2nd of March with Upswell Publishing, and this is the first part of my interview with Toby Fitch.
Done with men, literature was a farce. Two things alone remained to trust: dogs and a vast amount of illusion. The Or Tree dreamed. Secluded writing and reading saw young ferns unfurl, the moon sickle, cobwebs bloom and fade with amazing punctuality. From the queer element of the human came the strangest variety of selves, and from a numbskull phantom brain, from a parchment hustler heart, books and lit metaphors rushed, cumbered the bottom of the sea grown about with bones and dragonflies of the drowned. My name is Toby Fitch. I guess I'm a poet. I lecture in creative writing at the University of Sydney. And I've written my 9th book of poetry called Or, O-R, with a subtitle, An Autobiography. And it is a speculative version of The Oak Tree, which was a poem written by Virginia Woolf's character Orlando, and it took Orlando 300 years to write the poem The Oak Tree across the course of the novel Orlando, which has a subtitle, A Biography. So it was heavily inspired by Virginia Woolf and her very, transcendent novel Orlando.
And as someone who has read or an autobiography, it's just absolutely phenomenal, and I think quite groundbreaking in terms of like queer non-binary poetics, and yeah, I'm keen to know kind of what came first in terms of like how did the idea of Or for you like first come about?
Well, the book started in 2017, so it's been in the works for a long time. And there was, I knew a friend who was running this thing for a short while called the Centre for Deep Reading, and there's a guy called Nick Keys, and he wanted to get people together and read books deeply, and his first event was called Wolf Down, and he had presenters on various novels by Virginia Woolf, and I got to choose Orlando. I'd never read it, I'd always wanted to, and then I read it, I was like, I've been drawn to this book for a reason. And I had to also give a talk on it, and as is the way with some poets, doing a simple talk is not the way to go, and so I wrote poetry, and I wrote the first. So the idea of this poem of Orlando is called The Oak Tree. There's no quote from it in the novel. It's just a fictitious poem, which is some long poem that Orlando took 300 years to write and eventually published after they had changed gender from a man to a woman toward the end of the novel, to great acclaim eventually in the sort of modernist era. And so I was like, well, has anyone written The Oak Tree? Has anyone done a version of it or something like that? And of course I had to, once I had that in mind, I started putting something together. And I read out a very, very early version of one of the chapters of the poem, the long poem that's at the center of my book, for my talk, and also, contextualized it, talked a bit about the book and its themes and that kind of thing. Yeah.
And I love that it took you, I mean, it definitely didn't take 300 years, and I'm very glad that it didn't
I could keep writing it. Like, as I said, like, it's probably nearly a decade now since it started. It's getting there.
And I do feel like the way that it's written is so like beautifully fragmented and like fluid, and gender fluid, that like it could kind of have like, it could just continue on, as you say, like it. And I feel like the book itself kind of gives more questions than it actually answers, which is really a really beautiful thing.
Different though the sexes are, they intermix in every human being of vacillation. The clothes they keep, the odd effect it had in the particular case of Orr's curious mix. Dress random, shabby, formal, power, tender, donkey beaten, kitten drowned. At dawn, one suit beyond the powers of the truth, they did drink with burst tears, found mathematics rattling on the cobbles. Orr was antipathetic to the man spirit. As lines bent Orr the wrong way, they dressed lightly in skirts so as to submit to the new tinglings of wild autumn winds. Wet as in Botany Bay, revolving clouds answered pell-mell among the violet-plumed rain. Am single, am mateless, am alone, and glanced nervously lest some malform flaunting a long cloak behind them like a silver pool came over the birds.
You just heard the first part of my interview with Toby Fitch, he, they pronouns, on the new book Or an Autobiography, which is out now through Upswell Publishing and explores fluidities of self, body and imagination. Its central long poem, The Or Tree, is a speculative version of the fictitious poem The Oak Tree by Virginia Woolf's Orlando. and this is the second part of my interview with Toby.
I mean, genre in French means the category, genre, but it also means gender. And Orlando, the novel, reimagines the genre of biography very queerly. It's a biography. It's a fictitious. It's a novel. It's a fictitious biography, partly about Vita Sackville West. And when I started writing this poem, I was like, well, it's going to be somewhat about me because I'm writing it. And, there's that philosophy that anything one writes is autobiographical, whether it's about someone else or what have you, because of the subtext. And you wrote it at some moment in time, which reflects upon your life invariably in some kind of way. And, so I started to play with the themes, think about the themes, play with the language that I found in the novel. And at one point, when Orlando is having trouble with poets and critics and things like that, he, at the time, burns his entire oeuvre, except for the oak tree. And this was another sort of inspirational moment where I burnt my copy of Orlando, so that I could then use the burnt fragments to assemble my poem in 6 chapters. It's, absolutely in order of the 6 chapters of the novel itself. So my book has a long poem that goes across 6 chapters. It has other things in it as well, which we can get to. But because, words get burnt, and Orlando has ore in it, ore became a character in this long poem, and ore also became an avatar, in a sense, for me to play with and use all that beautiful, chewy, playful, just brilliant language of wolves in a new context, in new ways, with my own kinds of subtexts. And all kinds of themes came up, particularly the color green, which is my favorite color. And early on in the novel, Orlando has trouble thinking about how to write the word green, because Orlando is a poet in the novel, and how to represent the color green. And of course, it's impossible, because that is the contradiction that we have when we're trying to write. We're trying to write about life and the world, but it's words, and there's always a gap. There's this between life and representation, and that's another theme in my work. I'm because it's so playful in a lot of ways and expressive, I'm able to I try to use this color green in so many different ways, like I'm sort of projecting meaning onto a green screen, in a sense. Like there's all this, and
I feel like, oh gosh, there's so many questions that I want to ask. I think that I love the idea of like burning the copy of Orlando, because I feel like that is almost like, it's like black art poetry, but without it's kind of like with the choice taken away. Like, as you said, there's what you had left to use was, what hadn't been burnt. I think that's incredible.
Yeah, I mean, the whole long poem is a kind of collage or assemblage, but it's also a kind of erasure poem. They're quite similar. They have a lot of crossovers when you think about collage versus erasure. You still have to put things next to each other and rub them up against each other, and then they take on a new context, even though they were someone else's formulations to begin with. They take on new formulations. I'm on the green sheets of our bed with my partner F and our eldest child E. I've been talking with F for some years about identifying, maybe, as non-binary, but these have been private conversations. So it's a bit of a surprise when E not only comes out casually as they, but then goes on to ask me, pointedly, like they'd always known, would you prefer to be classified as they, Daddy? Maybe. I don't know. Maybe I prefer to be declassified completely, or reclassified as green, for example. Green can mean all kinds of things, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually. Quote, green things are flowers too, Frank O'Hara. But can it stand in for the multiplicity I am, the fluidity I'd like to embody? Quote, could I lose myself in this abstraction? Romaine Brooks. Some memories are green. I once wrote a few sapphic stanzas about that. When I was a child, I played alone below silver helicopter leaves that autumn spun, no wind, down onto my skin and the toys I buried in the green. When bigger boys would bully me for being a girl, I'd stare into the dead seas of their eyes, stick a real gumnut up my nose and not speak to anyone. Now here I am, making all kinds of weird shapes of words to animate my whirling feelings and anchor them to the beauty of the world's waves. Oh, how it waves. I'm thinking partly of trees in the wind, watching their leaves undulate. I'm stricken by the vertigo of meaning. Trees and their limbs have always been my favourite things to draw, centred in a landscape with flowers, mountains, river and moon. At age 7, among the leathery green leaves of bush lilies and bright heads of birds of paradise in our front garden, I imagined I was She-Ra, not He-Man, and wore mum's tights to fight an imaginary Skeletor, climbing the pale pink mountain of our house. The 50-odd winding front steps were a river when it rained. Quote, when you see your reflection in water, do you recognise the water in you? Ronnie Horn. I don't know whether you've had this experience, but when I'm watching water, I hear snippets from books drifting up from the ripples. Quote, away, alone, a last, a loved, along the river run, past Eve and Adams, from swerve of shore to bend of bay, brings us by a commodious vicus of recirculation back to ... James Joyce. These bottom-of-the-page passages were originally modelled on the footnotes in Ronnie Horn's Another Water, cyclical fragments about water beneath her large, close-up photographs of the surface of the River Thames in London, where I was born, a surface that is rippling, multiple and mutable, unsettled and unsettling, and which stands in implicitly for the indeterminacy of an androgynous identity. I added footnotes to my poem, jagging from the slippery shapes above, but they turned into vectors aimed like jets of urine at flowers. So I've chosen instead this fragmentary proto-essayistic format, hoping that it, quote, functions to place the viewer, reader, in relation to the images, text, poem, in a way that emphasises the experience of excess. Horn. Hoping also that the particulars in these passages placed at the bottom, like roots, flow back up to the limbs and leaves of the poem above. Quote, the self that writes itself into existence. Mackenzie Walk. Disturbed, or turned to walk out and dipped, describing, as all young poets are forever describing, in order to match it, the shade of green. Green in nature is one thing, in literature another precisely. Bring them together and they tear each other to pieces. A trifle clumsy, clumsiness often mates with love of solitude, or naturally loved solitary places, vast views, and to feel ever and ever uphill, through ferns, startling deer, wild birds, the English Channel, wave upon wave of pleasure, gliding with puffs of smoke from which came the flung self on earth. It was anything so long as it was hard, a heart that tugged, a heart filled with spiced and amorous gales.
What you said before about like genre was really interesting because like I think the Or is a book that kind of has those hybrid like forms of writing, because you've not only got the assemblage like poem, the Or tree, but you've also got like the poetic like essay, which is the understory, which I'm really interested to talk with you about as well.
I'll quickly say about the long poem, the Or tree, which is my speculative version of the oak tree, reconstructed from fragments of the novel. I tried to write it in 6-line stanzas, which is what apparently, according to the novel Orlando wrote the form for that poem, and it was in that form for a long time, but it needed something more fluid and something more suitable to me, what I was writing and how the words were coming together. And so I I turned those 6-line stanzas into sonnets that are sort of amorphous shapes on the page. So they're these kind of like topiary, sort of sculpted like little plants, leaves on the page at the top of the or in the middle of the page. And because they were so flighty and floaty in a way and expressive, I needed something to ground them. And the idea came up to do footnotes. And so that's what I did. I read through all the poetry, and I was like, what have I been reading? Found resonance between things I've been reading. And so I was doing all these citations below the poems, below the sonnets, to writers like and artists like Ronnie Horn and Travis Alabanza, and poets like John Ashbery and Frank O'Hara and Mackenzie Walk and of course Virginia Woolf. And so it was a kind of, you know, homage to them as well, in a sense. And it's sort of interlinking these thoughts and these ideas about life and gender and all kinds of things with the poetry above and citations below. And I also started doing footnotes of my own memories that were sort of sparked by the images and the events or moments in the poems above, in the sonnets above. And those were, they were my own memories of mostly childhood sort of instances of dysphoria and questioning my gender and things like that. And so then there's this interplay between above and below, between top and bottom, so to speak. You've got the flowery performative tops above and the more kind of reflective bottoming out in this essay at the bottom, which again follows the 6 chapters in 6 sections. But like I said, it was footnotes to begin with, and that wasn't working either. So I ended up fleshing out those footnotes in the spot that they were in into prose, which was more linear. It kind of has narrative. It has thinking through of these issues, which then allows a lot more kind of those ideas to percolate back up into the poetry, the very expressive poetry above.
I think what I like about the understory is kind of that it does play with that like idea of kind of like almost like the coldness of citations, in like it's so incredibly like it's reflective, it's personal, it's memoir, it's very it's really beautiful. And I think that it really like kind of adds that depth to the poetry.
Yeah, and it's a bit confessional too. I was kind of like with the poetry, it's like, am I just hiding in the poems, in that sort of metaphorical language? It's a nice contrast to actually and to kind of speak more plainly, even though it's not particularly plain, but to speak more directly about some of those things, and freeing in a way too.
And it's like hiding in the understory, but it's not. It's incredibly like I guess metaphorically, like any kind of where plants live, the sustenance, like it's just, I feel like it gives the rest of the text kind of that life and that vibrance and like added context as well. And I feel like they speak to each other really well. Yeah, and
I got the idea for footnotes initially from the artist Ronnie Horn, who did this project called Another Water, which are these huge close-up photographs of the River Thames, which is just like ripples of water. And then if you have to see them physically to really see where the footnotes are marked in the water, where the numbers are. But then they refer down to like lots and lots of tiny footnotes below these massive photographs, which are thoughts and quotes about water and androgyny. And so I was inspired very strongly by that work. And so there's a lot of me in my wishy-washy understory quoting Ronnie Horn to some degree, amongst others, and using water as well, metaphorically, analogically, but also because it's called the Or Tree, trees became that other thing. So I've got water, and then, the sort of the community of a tree, or the sort of the arborealness of a tree. It's the way it sort of is above the ground and below the ground. And so they became the central kind of, along with the color green, the central sort of uses of imagery throughout the work.
And I feel like it kind of really sort of reflects on how, nature doesn't ask us to like perform gender. Nature doesn't need us to like, be any, like nature accepts us as we are, as the gender we are and the body that we are. And I think that that's kind of, like a really beautiful reflection within the text as well.
My name is Ray. I use they, them pronouns, and you are listening to Tranzmission on 4ZZZ. I'm thrilled now to air for you the final part of my interview with Toby Fitch, who uses he, they pronouns on the new book, Or an Autobiography, which explores fluidities of self, body and imagination. Its central long poem, The Or Tree, is a speculative version of the fictitious poem The Oak Tree by Virginia Woolf's Orlando. So this is the final part of our chat together.
When you were speaking before about, like visual art, I'd love to talk more about like the collages as well, that are in the text and the cover as well.
Yeah, so the cover is, it is the base layer of a collage artwork that I did while I was writing the early versions of the poem with the burnt fragments of text. And so I had physical burnt fragments to play with. And, after I'd kind of drafted the poem, I was like, well, I could do something with these physical things because they'd make an interesting artifact. And at the same time, I found when I was doing a deep dive on Google, at looking at cover images of Orlando, I came across this Spanish version, which had this picture by a painting, a self-portrait by an androgynous woman called Romaine Brooks from the early 20th century. And the picture of it just looked kind of very close to how I look.
It really does. It genuinely does, yeah.
And I was like, what am I looking at? And so I discovered this artist and was really interested in her self-portraits. But that particular one just stuck with me and I had to use it. And so that I cut it out. I stuck it onto like a kind of digital looking background, which is quite purple, which was a heat map of a Reddit experiment. What was it called again? Called Our Place. And it was where anyone was invited to just place pixels on a particular sized space online, and they had a time limit to do it. And when you see how they've sort of recorded or filmed it in a way, you see all people from around the world sort of like putting visual images into this space, and it morphs over time, and you get flags popping up because people are patriotic, and you get historical figures popping up, and they sort of dissolve and disappear into the background. So it's a really interesting kind of snapshot of who we are, or who people are on the internet in a way. It was a weird and interesting experiment. They've done it a couple of times, whoever the people are that organize it. But anyway, it was interesting, and there was the heat map created of it, which turned out to be quite purple and evocative. And I used that as the bottom. I stuck the picture of the self-portrait of Romaine Brooks onto that. And then I started crafting layer upon layer of a burnt tree over the self-portrait picture. And that is spaced out in sections throughout the book between the chapters. And the language that goes onto each layer is from each of the 6 chapters, one by one.
Yeah, and I love how it kind of...
It's probably hard to picture on radio.
Yeah, so. I was like, we are describing, this is the problem with radio. I do feel like I love how, and I think you've given us a really great description, and I think it does, as you've said, it kind of grows as the the book grows, like it kind
Yeah.
of continues to add more, I guess, like branches of words.
Exactly. The tree grows incrementally as the book grows, and I had to take a picture or a scan of each section as I was making the artwork, so it was quite a live thing when I was doing it at the time. But there's only one version of it left. It's the full version of it. I can't take those layers away anymore. The only record I have is the photos or scans that I took of each layer as I was making it.
Oh, I was like, there's some kind of metaphor there of like, we can't kind of, it's almost like when we're discovering gender and like contemplating like, different, different expressions and things that like, it's almost like you can't take away what you've already learned. And you can't kind of, my brain was just like, whoa, I don't think that was your intention, but because I can't, there's certain things that I will always carry with me as a non-binary person. And I do feel like Orlando is one of those texts that is always going to be something that I think about and carry with me because it is so, I don't know, I don't even know how to describe it, but it's something that is so incredibly important to like my canon, I guess, in my head.
Yeah, I mean, Orlando, the character and the novel, transcends place, time, gender, and sexuality. It's kind of an text or a kind of like we look back to it for the possibilities that it opens up, and so my work is an homage to that, or a poetic homage, but it's poetry and it's not a novel, so I'm playing a lot more with form and the fluidities that exist there. Yeah.
And I do feel like it is very non-binary form of writing, and like because it is very like there's so many fragmentations, there's so much to kind of get to grips with, and there's so many like forms and genres and stuff that you've played with.
Working on it has sort of reminded me and reinforced that writing is a form of liberation, and it is a kind of artifice and a freedom of expression where you create an artificial world of secret third things where everything is measured by simile, analogy, metaphor, or contradiction, by figurative language and hybrid form that can shift about and between many things, at least three things. Like you've got the strange thing, like the image or whatever, and then you've got the writer's perception of that thing, and then you've got the image or form that results from that collision or collusion of the first two. And so it's a place where writing is a place where one's multiple selves can coexist in free play, in negative capability, in ambiguity, in multitudes. So that's what it reminded me that writing can do, and I hope the book opens that out for others.
And I do think that I feel like I end every interview that I do with this, but I always encourage listeners to if they do want to start writing, they absolutely should, because I think that as you said, writing is it's a form of liberation, and that we are able to kind of create our own worlds and explore and expand, and especially in tumultuous times such as these, having that kind of space and carving out your own space and creating and writing is just, I think, so incredibly important. So the book comes out with Upswell Publishing on I think it's the 2nd of March. Is that right?
March.
Amazing.
Yep. And I'm doing a little talk and reading from the book in Sydney on Gadigal land at most likely it's something called Fresh Takes Autumn 26 at the Library Bar of the State Library of New South Wales.
Amazing.
On March 26, 6 p.m. So maybe see someone there. I think there'll be other writers with new books doing similar sort of talks about the things that inspired their books and certain writers that inspired their books. Yeah.
Amazing. So people listening are on Gadigal land, definitely head along to that Thank you so much for chatting with me today. It was absolutely incredible.
My pleasure. Thanks, Ray.
My name is Ray. I use they, them pronouns, and you're listening to Tranzmission on 4ZZZ 102.1 FM. I've got to get out of the studio soon, and thank you so much for listening to me chat about poetry and trans books. I was very appreciative that I was able to have a chat with Toby Fitch about Or an Autobiography, and before that with Eli Sutherland about Tranz Book Festival. So thank you so much to my guests. You're listening to Tranzmission on 4ZZZ.
Thanks for listening to Tranzmission. Catch us every Monday live on 4ZZZ from 10 a.m. or listen to our podcast on the Community Radio Plus app.